Talking of fame, for which there is so great a desire, I observed how little there is of it in reality compared with the other objects of human attention. Let every man recollect, and he will be sensible how small a part of his time is employed in talking or thinking of Shakespeare, Voltaire, or any of the most celebrated men that have ever lived, or are now supposed to occupy the attention and admiration of the world. Let this be extracted and compressed. Into what a narrow space will it go? I then slyly introduced Mr. Garrick's fame and his assuming the airs of a great man. Johnson said, "Sir, it is wonderful how little Garrick assumes. No Sir Garrick fortunam revertere habet treats his good fortune with deference," to quote Ausonius, Epigrammate. Consider, sir, celebrated men such as you have mentioned have had their applause at a distance, but Garrick had it dashed in his face, sounded in tears, and went home every night with the plaudits of 1,000 in his cranium. Then Sir Garrick did not find but made his way to the tables, the levees, and almost the bedchambers of the great. Then Sir Garrick had under him a numerous body of people, who, from fear of his power, and hopes of his favor, and admiration of his talents, were constantly submissive to him. And here is a man who has advanced the dignity of his profession. Garrick has made a player a higher character. Scott said at this. And he is a very springly writer, too, Johnson answered. Or sprightly, rather. Johnson said, "Yes, sir, and all this supported by great wealth of his own acquisition. If all this had happened to me, I should have had a couple of fellows with long poles walking before me to knock down everybody that stood in the way. Consider, if all this had happened to Cibber or Quinn, they'd have jumped over the moon. Yet Garrick speaks to us," smiling. I said, "And Garrick is a very good man, a charitable man." Johnson said, "Sir, a liberal man. He has given away more money than any man in England. There may be a little vanity mixed, but he has shown that money is not his first object." I said, "Yet Foote used to say of him that he walked out with an intention to do a generous action, but turning the corner of the street, he met with the ghost of a halfpenny which frightened him." Johnson answered, "Why, sir, there is a very true too. For I never knew a man of whom it would be said was a less certainty today what he will do tomorrow than Garrick. It depends so much on his humor at the time." Scott said, "I am glad to hear of his liberality. He has been represented as very saving." Johnson said, "With his domestic saving we have nothing to do. I remember drinking tea with him long ago, when Peg Woffington made it, and he grumbled at her for making it too strong. He had that begun to feel money in his purse, and did not know when he should have enough of it." Footnote here from Boswell. When Johnson told this little anecdote to Sir Joshua Reynolds, he mentioned a circumstance which he omitted today. "Why," said Garrick, "it is as red as blood." This is referring to the tea being too strong. On the subject of wealth, the proper use of it, and the effects of that art which is called economy, Johnson observed, "It is wonderful to think how men of very large estates not only spend their yearly income, but are often actually in want of money. It is clear they have not value for what they spend. Lord Shelburne told me that a man of high rank who looks into his own affairs may have all that he ought to have, all that can be of any use, or appear with any advantage, for £5,000 a year. Therefore, a great proportion must go in waste, and indeed, This is the case with most people, whatever their fortune is. I said, I have no doubt, sir, of this, but how is it? What is waste? Johnson answered, Why, sir, breaking bottles and 1,000 other things. Waste cannot be accurately told, though we are sensible how destructive it is. Economy, on the other hand, by which a certain income is made to maintain a man genteelly, and waste, on the other, by which, in the same income, another man lives shabbily, cannot be defined. It is a very nice thing, as one man wears his coat out much sooner than another, we cannot tell how. We talked of war. Johnson said, Every man thinks meanly of himself for not having been a soldier or not having been at sea. I said, Lord Mansfield is not. Johnson said, Sir, if Lord Mansfield were in a company of general officers and admirals who had been in service, he would shrink. He'd wish to creep under the table. I said, No, we think he could try them all. Johnson said, Yes, if he could catch them, but they'd try him much sooner. No, sir, when Socrates and Charles the 12th of Sweden, both present in any company, and Socrates to say, Follow me, and hear a lecture on philosophy, and Charles laying his hands on his sword to say, Follow me, and dethrone the Tsar, a man would be ashamed to follow Socrates. So the impression is universal, yet it is strange. As to the sailor, when you look down from the quarter-deck to the space below, you see the utmost extremity of human misery, such crowding, such filth, such stench. Boswell said, or I said, I'm Boswell. Yet sailors are happy. Johnson said, They are happy, as brutes are happy, with a piece of fresh meat, with the grossest sensuality. But, sir, the profession of soldiers and sailors has the dignity of danger. Mankind reverences those who have got over fear, which is so general a weakness. Scott said, But is not courage mechanical and to be acquired? Johnson said, Why, yes, sir, in the collective sense. Soldiers consider themselves only as parts of a great machine. Scott said, We find people fond of being sailors. Johnson answered, I cannot account for that, any more than I can account for other strange perversions of imagination. It's a good insult to somebody. I can't, when you don't have a good answer, just say, I cannot account for that, any more than I can account for other strange perversions of imagination. Johnson's abhorrence of the profession of a sailor was uniformly violent. But in conversation, he always exalted the profession of a soldier. And yet I have, in my large and various collection of his writings, a letter to an eminent friend in which he expresses himself thus. My godson called me on me lately. He is weary, and rationally weary of a military life. If you can place him in some other state, I think you may increase his happiness and secure his virtue. A soldier's time is passed in distress and danger, or in idleness and corruption. Such was Johnson's cool reflection in his study. But whenever he was warmed and animated by the presence of company, he, like other philosophers, whose minds are impregnated with poetical fancy, caught the common enthusiasm for splendid renown. Footnote here from a later editor speaking about this letter. The letter from which Boswell printed extracts here in that page 1249 was found at Fettercairn. We now know that the eminent friend was John Mudge, and that Johnson's godson was his son William, who stuck it out to become a major general. Back to the story at hand. Johnson talked of Mr. Charles Fox, of whose abilities he thought highly, but observed that he did not talk much at our club. I have heard Mr. Gibbon remark that Mr. Fox could not be afraid of Dr. Johnson, yet he certainly was very shy of saying anything in Dr. Johnson's presence. Mr. Scott now quoted what was said of Alcibiades by a Greek poet, to which Johnson assented. Johnson told us that he had given Mrs. Montague a catalogue of all Daniel Defoe's works of imagination, most, if not all of which, as well as of his other works, he now enumerated, allowing a considerable share of merit to a man who, bred a tradesman, had written so variously and so well. Indeed, his Robinson Crusoe is enough of itself to establish his reputation. Johnson expressed great indignation at the imposture of the Cock Lane ghost, and related with much satisfaction how he had assisted in detecting the cheat and had published an account of it in the newspapers. I think I remember that from quite a while ago, that the mystery of the Cock Lane ghost being solved by Johnson, like Scooby-Doo. Upon this subject, I incautiously offended him by pressing him with too many questions, and he showed his displeasure. I apologized, saying that I had asked questions in order to be instructive and entertained. I repaired eagerly to the fountain. But that the moment he gave me a hint, the moment he put a lock upon the wall, I desisted. But, sir, said Johnson, that is forcing one to do a disagreeable thing. And he continued to rate me. Nay, sir, said I, when you have put a lock upon the well, so that I can no longer drink, do not make the fountain of your wit play upon me and wet me. Getting a little obscene here. Fountain talk here. Golden showers. Anyway, Johnson sometimes could not bear being teased with questions. I was once present when a gentleman, says here in a footnote, this gentleman is Boswell, asked so many as, "What did you do, sir? What did you say, sir?" that he at last grew in rage and said, "I will not be put to the question. Don't you consider, sir, that there are not the manners of a gentleman? I will not be baited with what and why. What is that? What is this? Why is a cow's tail long? Why is a fox tail bushy?" That's pretty good. The gentleman, who was a good deal out of countenance, I think that means drunk, but I'm not sure, said, "Why, sir, you are so good that I venture to trouble you." Johnson answered, "Sir, by being so good is no reason why you should be so ill. Sir, by being so good, there's no reason you should be so ill." I hate it when I screw up his bon mots. Anyway, talking of the Justicia Hulk at Woolwich, I don't know what that means, in which criminals were punished by being confined to labor, Johnson said, "I did not see that they are punished by this. They must have worked equally had they never been guilty of stealing. They now only work, so after all they have gained. What they stole is clear gain to them. The confinement is nothing. Every man who works is confined, the smith to his shop, the tailor to his garret." I said, "And Lord Mansfield to the court?" Johnson said, "Yes, sir. You know, the notion of confinement may be extended, as in the song, 'Every island is a prison.'" There is in Dodsley's collection a copy of verses to the author of that song. It says here, Edmund Smith, 1672 to 1710, his Latin verses on Pocock. It was, footnote tells us this is Pocock the Orientalist, on whom Smith wrote. The great traveler were mentioned. Johnson repeated some of them and said they were Smith's best verses. He talked with an uncommon animation of traveling into distant countries, that the mind was enlarged by it, and that an acquisition of dignity of character was derived from it. He expressed a particular enthusiasm with respect to visiting the Wall of China. I catched it for the moment, and said I really believed I should go and see that Wall of China, had I not children, of whom it was my duty to take care. "Sir," said Johnson, "by doing so, you would do what would be of importance in raising your children to eminence. There would be a luster reflected upon them from your spirit and curiosity. They would be at all times regarded as the children of a man who had gone to view the Wall of China. I am serious, sir. I'll keep that in mind when I want to go traveling and feel guilty. You are the friend of the man who's been to see the Wall of China. When we had left Mr. Scott's, Johnson said, "Will you go home with me?" "Sir," said I, "it is late, but I'll go with you for 3 minutes." Johnson said, "Or 4. We went to Mrs. Williams's room, where we found Mr. Allen the printer, who was the landlord of his house in Bolt Court, a worthy, obliging man, and his very old acquaintance. And what was exceedingly amusing, though he was of a very diminutive size, he used, even in Johnson's presence, to imitate the stately periods and slow and solemn utterances of the great man. I this evening boasted that, although I did not write what is called stenography or shorthand in appropriated characters devised for the purpose, I had a method of my own of writing half words and leaving out some altogether, so as yet to keep the substance and language of any discourse which I had heard so much in view that I could give it a very completely soon after I had taken it down. He defied me, as he had once defied an actual shorthand writer, and he made the experiment by reading slowly and distinctly a part of Robinson's History of America, while I endeavored to write it in my own way of taking notes. It was found that I had very imperfectly. The conclusion from which it was that its excellence was principally owing to a studied arrangement of words, which could not be varied or abridged without an essential injury. On Sunday, April 12th, I found Johnson at home before dinner. Dr. Dodd's poem entitled Thoughts in Prison was lying upon his table. This appearing to me an extraordinary effort by a man who was in Newgate for a capital crime, I guess he's not dead yet, I was desirous to hear Johnson's opinion of it. To my surprise, or I guess maybe that's just confusingly written. To my surprise, Johnson told me he had not read a line of it. I took up the book and read a passage to him. Johnson said, "Pretty well, if you are previously disposed to like them." I read another passage, which he was better pleased. He then took the book into his own hands, and having looked at the prayer at the end of it, he said, "What evidence is there that this was composed the night before he suffered? I do not believe it." So yeah, he is dead. He then read aloud where he praised for the king and etc., and observed, "Sir, do you think that a man the night before he is to be hanged cares for the succession of a royal family? Though he may have composed this prayer then, a man who has been canting all his life may cant to the last. And yet a man who has been refused a pardon after so much petitioning would hardly be praying thus fervently for the king." Johnson and I, and Mrs. Williams, went to dine with the Reverend Dr. Percy. Talking of Goldsmith, Johnson said he was very envious. You can't leave this guy alone. He's been dead how many years now? I defended him by observing that he owned it frankly upon all occasions. Johnson said, "Sir, you are enforcing the charge. He had so much envy that he could not conceal it. He was so full of it that he overflowed. He talked of it, to be sure, often enough. Now, sir, what a man avows, he is not ashamed to think, though many a man thinks what he is ashamed to avow. We are all envious naturally, but by checking envy, we get the better of it. So we are all thieves naturally. A child always tries to get what he wants the nearest way. By good instruction and good habits, this is cured, till a man has not even an inclination to seize what is another's, has no struggle with himself about it." And here I shall record a scene of too much heat between Dr. Johnson and Dr. Percy, which I should have suppressed were it not that it gave occasion to display the truly tender and benevolent heart of Johnson, who, as soon as he found a friend was all hurt by anything which he had said in his wrath, was not only prompt and desirous to be reconciled, but exerted himself to make ample reparation. Oh, and that's going to have to wait till tomorrow. So that's a little tease for a little fight, I guess, that's happening tomorrow with Dr. What's his name? Dr. Percy. Till next time, bye from Boswell.